He kōna ipurangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
This is Mediawatch. I'm Colin Peacock. On the programme this week, we talk to the prime mover of a new move to improve integrity in our politics and public life, and also public relations and the media, which sounds good, but are things actually that bad? He also wants to keep influence peddling lobbyists at bay, and he's looking for journalists to flag cases of corruption and create content for his cause.
Yeah, New Zealand isn't as served well as it used to be, in the time that I've followed media and politics in the last 20 years.
But is this then a new kind of journalism or a new kind of lobbying on behalf of the philanthropists who fund him? But first, the Prime Minister has got plenty of problems on his plate right now, like the economy, geopolitical turmoil, health, housing and the school lunch saga that seems to be creating headlines every weekday, none of them good. And the media haven't helped, with tricky interviews and polls pointing to public support slumping for his coalition and for him personally as the Prime Minister. But many in the media are now hinting he might not be in that top job for long. But based on what?
Is this a trend? Is this something you start to freak out about?
Well, I don't freak out about it. I didn't have a pony in this race. I run a humble taxpayer.
I don't mean you. I mean, if you're on the 9th floor, do you start hitting panic stations?
Well, it certainly things have got to start getting urgent, because it is not. As you say, it's the trend.
That was Jordan Williams of the Taxpayers Union, a lobby group that doesn't have a pony in the race of which politicians lead the country, as he said there on News Talk ZB this week. But it does pony up for the most regular polls of public opinion these days about their popularity and their parties. And there has been a freak out over the latest one, but mostly in the media, as we'll hear. On his Beehive Buzz slot on ZB shortly before the big poll reveal on Monday, ZB's political editor Jason Walls said that the Taxpayers Union monthly polls, carried out by National Party pollster Curia, are handy now for the cash-strapped news media.
What's happened within the last couple of years is we're seeing a downfall of public polling from the mainstream media outlets, such as NewsHub did one, and One News does one very sporadically. The Courier poll, which is funded by the Taxpayer Union, comes out every month, and it's one that we put a lot of stock into because it's quite a credible poll. So now it is almost our main bellwether of tracking where political parties are at.
And the media certainly did seize on the results of this latest poll, which showed the current governing coalition behind the opposition parties put together in popularity. And at the same time, the National Party leader was not as popular as his own party either. On Midweek Media Watch last Wednesday, Hayden Donnell talked that over with Emile Donovan on RNZ National, and also how one radio host's take on that poll was pretty wide of the mark mathematically.
The Greens are up over 3 to 10. Not real. They have grown almost a third more support, have they? How? It hasn't happened.
Hosking is absolutely onto something there, because that has not happened. In fact, the Greens went down 3%.
Yeah, the Greens, I thought there. Wait a second. Okay, yeah.
They actually dropped.
Midweek Media Watch is on the Media Watch podcast page at rnz.co.nz if you missed it, or you'll find it wherever you get your podcasts. Now, also pumping up that opinion poll result before it was out on Monday was lobbyist David Cormack, the co-founder of a PR company who's also worked for the Labour Party and the Greens in the past. On social media, he told his followers,
"I hear there's a poll coming and National might be plunging. For Luxon's sake, they better be 30 plus. Below that, we're in Bridges country."
Bridges country being the sub-30% support level in polls, which prompted Simon Bridges to be rolled as the National Party leader 5 years ago. Now, that also followed a prolonged period of dead man walking commentaries in the media, which peaked when NewsHub asked people to sum up the struggling leader in a single word. Dick and dickhead were pretty prominent, along with don't know, in the subsequent word cloud that NewsHub ended up showing on the 6pm news. But as it turned out this week, the Luxon-led National Party was actually up in the latest Taxpayers Union Curia poll by 1.7%. Not the plunge I was promised, David Cormack tweeted when that was pointed out to him. But there was also an uptick in the opposition, and as Taxpayers Union boss Jordan Williams said, it's the trend that counts. And the trend has been down for National since December. A real summer of discontent was how Newsroom's Tim Murphy summed it up, and Stuff's political correspondent Jenna Lynch was also seeing it seasonally.
There's 2 whole winters between now and an election. Winters are when discontent sets in, and 2025's winter follows a summer of dissatisfaction.
And in the meantime, said Jenna Lynch, the question for Christopher Luxon was this.
Can he pull something off short term to calm the chatter in the commentator columns?
Now that's a tough one on 2 counts. The country's problems are big and long-term ones, and the commentators' chatter is more like a roar right now, and some of it has amplified Christopher Luxon's failure to cut through in the media. Kerry Woodham, for example, put it this way on Tuesday on News Talk ZB.
Christopher Luxon may have a great sausage, but he's not selling its sizzle.
And that day, Christopher Luxon himself told reporters they weren't adding any sizzle to the sausage of National's progress on homelessness.
We are very proud of the work we've done on emergency housing, and sadly, the media hasn't talked much about that.
But it was the impact of that poll result last Monday which preoccupied the media at that time. Interest.co.nz's political reporter Dan Brunskill reckoned,
the poor numbers might explain an uptick in rumours and speculation over the weekend that Luxon could be pushed out of the top job before the next election, or even the end of the year.
But rumours and speculation from where exactly? Well, Dan Brunskill cited one source.
Duncan Garner, a once well-informed political reporter, wrote in the Listener magazine that discussions about replacing Luxon were already taking place, though the article was highly speculative and lacked concrete evidence.
It certainly did, and it wasn't even the only one in the Listener magazine this week. Under the headline Mutterings in the Wings, political columnist Dan McLaughlin wrote,
Nationals MPs are not ready to talk about leadership change, but they are talking about the trigger points that might lead to it.
Now, online, that same article is slugged, how likely is the National Party to oust Christopher Luxon? But the article didn't answer that, it just raised further questions.
What would the trigger points be? How many gaps and painful interviews are too many? How low could the polls go? Will they pick up once the economy improves? How long before a coup becomes inevitable?
But at the same time, his fellow columnist Duncan Garner was much more definitive in his own daily podcast and newscast for Mediaworks called Editor-in-Chief. Here he is, back on the 5th of March.
Today, the coup d'etat that National would prefer it didn't have to undertake. But Christopher Luxon's indecisive leadership and his inability to connect means National, under his watch, could be a one-term government. So, privately, MPs are now discussing how to roll him and who takes over. I'll have more details on this shortly.
And while there weren't actually many details after that, Duncan Garner had plenty more to say in his slam dunk editorial slot.
The whispering campaign in Wellington about his weak and indecisive and increasingly struggling and unpopular leadership has gone to a new level, with National MPs now talking about not if he must be replaced, but when and who takes the job.
Now, Duncan Garner didn't say which MPs are privately plotting, presumably to preserve confidentiality, but how many, how senior, and how far down the track have they got with this rolling? Well, he gave no clues. It was a whispering campaign about a whispering campaign, to use Duncan Garner's own words. But he also assured his listeners he knew what he was talking about from experience.
As a political journalist for 20 years at Parliament, I saw coups develop early. I saw the lies, the tricks, the denials and the language used. I saw politicians into the death spiral. It was just time, and the execution was swift soon after that, just a matter of time. This is no different. Lifetime National supporters have stood around their barbecues all summer asking, when is he going to actually do anything? The answer is, he isn't. The next major announcement from Luxon will be his resignation as Prime Minister.
And that is a pretty definitive call there. Now, perhaps because of all those years in Parliament, reporting and commentating on radio and on TV, other commentators were recycling Garner's claims as news. But back when he was a TV political editor and mainstream radio host, Duncan Garner probably would have put a lot less weight on anecdotal evidence like this.
Mainstream media will miss this because they block certain conservative voices like Christian leader Bob McCroskey, who effectively was deplatformed by the media some years ago. So he set up his own way to connect, and he has a decent-sized audience, decent-sized following. He's used an email to Luxon from an early childhood teacher to expose just how much like Jacinda Ardern Luxon really is, and why he's no strong conservative leader willing to put the radicals and the social activists in their place. Look at this. So a worried preschool teacher contacted Luxon's office asking this. She writes, "What is going on in the education system? It's not okay. Why are you allowing this wokeness and confusion into schools?"
Now, the point of that was to illustrate that Luxon was out of touch with voters, and likewise his office, who replied to that complainant like this.
Christopher is a proud supporter of the LGBTQI+ community and wants New Zealand to be a country that celebrates and supports diversity, including our rainbow community. Nā mihi nui. And that's from the PM's office. No. Just no. The letter writer had specific concerns about 3, 4 and 5-year-olds. becoming trans preschoolers, identifying as trans preschoolers. Luxon and his staff needed to write back that he too stands against this and that no one on his watch is going to talk or act in such a way that makes this in any way viable and acceptable.
But if the public is turning off Christopher Luxon as a leader in numbers, it'll surely be things like the economy, the health system and jobs, and maybe even at the moment school lunches, and not the replies that his staff send to an individual citizen concerned about gender identification in one preschool, according to a conservative values pressure group. And if Luxon had responded personally in the manner that Duncan Garner suggested he should, well, the media might then have seen that as evidence that his energies were not really where they ought to be in this time of economic trouble and geopolitical crisis. But for his part, Duncan Garner put his considerable energy into writing off Christopher Luxon's Prime Ministership on his Editor-in-Chief show. In early March, for example, National Minister Maurice Williamson was on Duncan Garner's show saying Luxon should follow Trump's lead on diversity, equity and inclusion.
I don't know how you argue. I want it to be on merit. And there's going to be someone come along and say, no, you can't hire people based on merit.
Who's going to say that?
And, you know, how do you argue that? And but it's just that's just so black and white, and you'll have everybody upset because it doesn't mean you incorporate, you know, a one-legged lesbian from the South Island who's into saving gay whales getting a job. You look, if that's the person who's the best for the job, they should get it.
Morris, you've been wonderful, mate. Would you take on the job if Luxon rang you and said, okay, if you know everything, come on down?
No, too old and too boring.
Though not for Duncan Garner's daily podcast, clearly. Now, a few days later on Editor-in-Chief, Duncan Garner talked to Ashley Church, professional property investor and former National Party candidate, and also a director of the Israel Institute of New Zealand. And he also said that the Nats were doing the numbers already.
For the last 6 months, I've had people increasingly saying to me, this guy's a problem, they need to change him. And for most of that time, the last probably 4.5 of that 6 months, I've continued to defend him on the basis that he would come right, that he would grow into the role. I've completely changed my view on that now.
But in fact, Ashley Church had already declared Luxon must go 3 months ago on LinkedIn. And back then it was what he said was Luxon's failure to stand by Israel that prompted him to say so. And on Duncan Garner's Editor-in-Chief show, Ashley Church also said Luxon should be more like Trump.
And he's not capable of that. So I think he's on borrowed time. Maybe not in the next couple of months, but I think but before Christmas he'll be gone. And I know Matthew's probably going to disagree with that and say you can't do that during a term of an existing Prime Minister while it's in government. But I don't think they've got any choice.
But in fact, his fellow guest that day, Matthew Hooton, was in full agreement.
Gone by Christmas, Matthew.
No, I think that's probably right. I mean, I've never thought he was any good.
And in a long and intense airing of Christopher Luxon's perceived shortcomings that followed, Matthew Hooton, the former lobbyist and advisor to National, who helped Todd Muller replace Simon Bridges as leader in 2020, even cited Luxon's lacklustre results in the seventh form.
Look, I know this is terribly snobby and unkind, but he went to Christchurch Boys High, I believe, which is sort of an elite school. I went to Auckland Grammar, so I know those types of single-sex academic schools. And he was a complete nerd. And he got a B bursary. The only way to get a B bursary at a school like Auckland Grammar or Christchurch Boys or Wellington College, this is back in the 80s,
not to show
was,
up.
was to be a bit thick and not show up.
Another commentator taking Matthew Hooton and Duncan Garner's claims about Luxon seriously was Chris Trotter at interest.co.nz.
This sort of commentary would be much easier for Conservatives to dismiss were it coming from the usual left-wing suspects, but neither Hooton nor Garner fall into that category. If the centre, let alone the right, cannot hold, then things are most certainly falling apart.
But on newsroom.co.nz, former Minister Peter Dunn said the inevitable quiet mutterings within media and party circles
remain no more than the usual mutterings from nervous Nellies on a government's backbench when their party slips in the polls. Luxon is not about to be rolled by his caucus.
And another veteran observer, Richard Harman, said so too, but with some actual details among the reckons. On his site Politic, he cited two separate but unnamed sources as saying concerns have been raised with the new National Chief Whip, Stuart Smith, earlier this year at informal social sessions that National's backbench MPs have on Wednesday nights. Smith's advice, reportedly, was that the transaction cost of changing the leader now would be too high. And another anonymous MP told Politic this week, people do talk, but at present, that's all they are doing. And some in the media are doing plenty of that, fueled by that poll result on Monday and suppositions of the impact that it might have had.
There's only one way to describe this poll, and that's the March massacre for the National Party. Despite having the platform of government, New Zealanders have told Christopher Luxon it's over, you got to go. And National MPs are openly now talking about his downfall and plotting his downfall.
That was Duncan Garner on his show again last Tuesday, rolling the clock back to his days at TV3 when hyping up the polls that they paid for at the top of the 6pm news was a key part of the job. As we've heard, MPs are certainly not openly plotting Luxon's downfall, as Duncan Garner said there. And at interest.co.nz, Dan Brunskill's take on that was this.
These rumours often surface when poll numbers are low and shouldn't be taken too seriously. However, those who dismissed speculation about Jacinda Ardern's 2023 resignation were ultimately proven wrong.
Well, that's true too, and when her successor lost the election heavily, pundits were also saying, with some certainty, it was a matter of when, not if, he would quit. But last Sunday, viewers of TVNZ's Q&A show heard the fill-in host Guyon Espiner introduce the Labour Party leader this way.
Well, despite post-election predictions, former Prime Minister and Labour leader Chris Hipkins held on to his job across the first year of being in opposition. So, for the largest party of opposition, attention now turns to whether they can convince the country they're up to another go on the Treasury benches.
Showing that even though pundits prompted by polls are telling us definitively that leaders are a busted flush, they can be wrong. And one small irony here. 5 years after Newshub declared that National Party leader Simon Bridges was a dead man walking, and also a dickhead, it's Newshub that's now dead, and its reporting of his poll problems in the past is now nowhere to be found. But just a year ago, it was Simon Bridges who topped a Courier opinion poll asking Aucklanders who they fancied as the next mayor. Last weekend here on Mediawatch, we took a long look at a development that took the New Zealand Herald and Newstalk ZB's newsrooms by surprise, as well as their bosses. Canadian billionaire and alternative media backer James Grennan taking a big stake in the company that owns them, NZME. And then he proposed to sweep away the governors of the company and replace them with his own picks, including his own self. And this week, James Grennan hit back at suggestions he was splashing his cash in order to exert his own ideological and editorial influence over the news output. Now, on Mediawatch last week, we also talked about all this with Dr. Bryce Edwards, a political scientist who was formerly a frequent New Zealand Herald contributor, and he was simultaneously alarmed by and intrigued by the possibilities of a motivated money man shaking things up in our media. Now, Bryce Edwards is the director of the newly formed and grandly titled Integrity Institute, a new watchdog and research outfit intent on highlighting corruption and poor practice and urging greater accountability. And another of the issues that bothers him was also in the news again this week.
Yeah, oh my God, imagine last night if you worked at Wellington Water. Talk about like the Sunday dread.
Well,
Going
you've got
back
two.
to work.
You got two job interviews, basically, haven't you?
Well, yeah, you've got to go back and show that you should stay in your job.
Newstalk ZB's Katrina Bennett there on the Wellington Morning Show last Monday, the day that Wellington Water's leaders were called to a please explain with the minister and the shareholding councils, several of whom had called on Wellington's Water's leaders to resign last week.
Over this scandal where we found out ratepayer money was being overspent on pipe maintenance. Really, we were paying
three times
as much as other councils. Some of the mayors have come out, Tory whānau one openly, Wayne Guppy, saying that they expect Nick Leggett, the chair of Wellington Water, to resign.
So a tough day and a tough crowd for Wellington Water on Monday, and a good time on ZB to go to the ads, though maybe not this one.
When rain is pouring through your ceiling, a pipe has burst, or the washing machine has overflowed, ChemDry's 24/7 emergency water damage technicians are on standby to deal with the problem fast. Our qualified technicians will extract the water quickly.
The same day, Councillor Nico Winera told Morning Report that he believed the leadership of Wellington Water had to take the fall.
There was a report from AECOM and Deloitte which says that Wellington Water Limited has basically been paying 3 times as much as necessary to fix our pipes. So instead of a competitive tender process, they just had a small little cabal of contractors, mostly Fulton Hogan, divvying up contracts between them. You know, consultants were even managing contracts going to their own consulting firms. So to quote Hawkins or Pratchett, it really looks like a case of turtles all the way down, except with consultants.
And that reference to infinite regress would have gone over the heads of those not familiar with Discworld, A Brief History of Time, or maybe even Frank Zappa teaming up with Captain Beefheart about 50 years ago. But arguably the most strident calls for accountability came last week after those two reports about Wellington Water hit the headlines. Under a cartoon picture of a guy in a shirt and a tie directing a flood of banknotes that were flying out of a ruptured pipeline, Bryce Edwards described Wellington Water's procurement failures as a scandal of national significance and
a case study of everything that is wrong with New Zealand's infrastructure management: waste, inefficiency, and a culture that privileges corporate contractors.
Edwards also said Nick Leggett, simultaneously heading the agency Infrastructure New Zealand, was a glaring conflict of interest because it advocates for greater private sector involvement. And he went on to say,
"Can someone deeply embedded in the industry that profits from these procurement models be trusted to regulate and reform them effectively?"
And under the heading What Needs to Happen, Bryce Edwards put this at the top of the list.
Nick Leggett must resign. Accountability must start at the top. The revolving door of top executives means accountability is constantly deferred.
But this strong comment didn't appear anywhere in the news media. Bryce Edwards' own Integrity Institute published it and sent it to subscribers and supporters. Now, in recent years, Dr. Bryce Edwards became a familiar name and face as a very media-friendly political scientist at Otago University and later Victoria University of Wellington. He then became the editor of the Democracy Project, a philanthropically funded outfit at Victoria University, which published political analysis pieces online, as well as Politics Daily, a handy list of online links to articles and commentaries published elsewhere in the media about current issues. Now, that's been rebranded as the Integrity Institute News Briefing after Edwards quit the campus to lead this new outfit, pledging to scrutinise and challenge vested interests in New Zealand. And last month he told the NBR's political editor Brent Edwards, no relation, this.
I think there is a lot of corruption in New Zealand. There is rotten elements that do need more light shone on them. And, so far in recent years, media, political parties, academics haven't done enough on those areas.
And tackling the influence the wealthy have on the political process here was also part of the mission, Bryce Edwards told NBR. But two such people are the benefactors of the new Integrity Institute, philanthropists Grant and Marilyn Nelson. In a message to subscribers last week, Bryce Edwards also said he wants to work with media outlets and those with the journalistic and research skills to help us make a big impact. So is this then journalism that Bryce Edwards is doing here, or is it advocacy, or a new form of lobbying itself about, ironically, countering the influence of lobbying and big money?
Most journalists go into the profession to want to shine a light on what's happening behind the scenes and uncover things. But of course, we're living in an era when, resources are tight, business owners are asserting their own sort of agendas on the newsroom. We can't entirely just leave it to the media to scrutinise everything going on in society. But, that's understandable, especially with constraints, the job cuts.
But would you have faith that the most serious failings or most significant things would be picked up and prioritised and followed by media, even if they're not in position to devote as many reporters to as many issues as they would have in the past?
No, I don't have that confidence at all. New Zealand isn't as served well as it used to be, in the time that I've followed media and politics in the last 20 years. I'm setting up the Integrity Institute to scrutinise and challenge the role of wealthy individuals, entities, vested interests, if you like. We will, assist the media in their roles. We'll provide the research that we do for them. We'll collaborate where we can, and I'm looking for talented researchers, especially those with journalistic skills and backgrounds, to come on board and help us. We want to work with the media, but we will also scrutinise the media and hold different outlets to account where we feel that they are having shortcomings as well.
Yeah, you used to be a very familiar face on news programs and...
Look, the media changes and it's always in flux, and they look for new people and they want freshness, and that's fair enough. There's a bit of a life cycle of, political commentary and so forth. Sure. But to me, it feels like the Herald maybe has become a bit more pro-business, and they haven't really liked a lot of the columns that I've been writing, scrutinising business, scrutinising business donations, business lobbying, and have chosen, not to run those. And that's their right. And I'll continue to try and work with the Herald and others.
So at the moment, though, Integrity Institute sounds grand, but is it basically you and a computer and the Nelsons, picking up the tab and making it possible for you to do it? Is that what it is at the minute?
Yeah, pretty much. I'm quickly recruiting people. We announced a new hire, Jem Traylon, or current journalist at Business Desk. She's taken voluntary redundancy in the restructuring NZME, their owners, have undertaken, and she'll be starting in about 2 weeks with us. She'll have responsibility for looking primarily at the public service, scrutinising conflicts of interest, political appointments, cronyism if you like, also helping on some of other work streams like on lobbying, donations, and what interest groups are doing. But there's a number of others that are helping with database work at the moment, because we're going to be a very data-driven organisation on political donations, on political appointments, all the people that visit ministers in the beehive. We're digitising all of that information so that we can put together a lot of information about who really is running New Zealand, if you like, who is having influence. Whether we are classed as journalism or not, I'm not sure, but we'll be doing high quality research, hoping to get that published in different media outlets. We'll work with, and in some cases we will have collaborative arrangements. For example, I'm talking with different media outlets at the moment, trying to commission some of them to do some of our work, whereby we identify areas that we feel the media aren't covering or scrutinising enough, especially in terms of vested interests. We will fund outlets to do research whereby we don't have any sign off on that. We don't tell them what to do. They'll do it with journalistic integrity and publish those things on their own sites. Where possible, we want to enhance the media landscape, if you like. When I first started, I've been reaching out to a lot of different individuals to get advice on how to make impact. And one person, I think it was Nikki Hager, was saying, well, hey, maybe instead of poaching Guy and Espiner or Andrea Vance and getting them to work for you, you should leave them in their workrooms, because is there a real net benefit on shifting these great investigative journalists from one place to another? Maybe you should be working with different outlets and maybe hiring the people that are less employed at the moment, especially journalists being made redundant. And so that's what we're doing.
So a really interesting case study this week about Wellington Water. In your comment, you said, look, this is a case study of everything that's wrong. If you've got this overarching principle of integrity and exposing this stuff, it kind of reminded me of that police drama Line of Duty, about where it's all about investigating corrupt British cops, and one of them says to the other, look, when you're an anti-corruption police officer, you just see corruption everywhere, and because that's your mission, you will see corruption and failure everywhere.
Oh, look, I get accused of that quite a lot, and you have to laugh at it. Yes. I think
every failing is going to be a lack of integrity that your institute will be concerned about.
And look, I'll be lampooned for that, and that's fine, because we need someone that's at least putting the lens on some of these events. And, the rest of the status quo or the establishment can defend those things and say, no, these are just individual failings of individuals, etc. But no, that's what we will be looking for.
But we do still come as a nation quite, top 5 in all these. Yeah. There's the Transparency International Index. I know we've dropped a couple of places, but there are other ones, economic freedom.
Yeah, that's right. New Zealand isn't one of the worst countries in the world, far from it. But there's a descent in all those indexes. They're heading downwards, and there is a trend line that New Zealand has become complacent. And I think we have, unfortunately, come to believe our own sort of press releases that we're the least corrupt country in the world. Yeah, 100% pure New Zealand. And we believe our own publicity. Yes, Transparency International, lots of other watchdogs like to kind of cheerlead and champion that we're the best, and that has its place. And I guess I sense they are the good cops in sort of some of these debates. We're going to be the bad cops. We're going to be the ones that put the case for what's wrong with the way politics and business is working in New Zealand.
So previously you were based at universities and with the Democracy Project and so on. Now it's the institute's funded by the Nelsons. They have their own previous concerns about transparency, accountability, pursuing the government, for example, about COVID
wage subsidy scheme.
Wage subsidies and saying more of that should be repaid. So they funded work at universities previously, at Victoria University, who are not happy about how it was spent. Will you have to work their direction, or do you have the sort of independence from them that journalists expect to get from their own bosses and publishers?
Ultimately, it will be up to the public and journalists, broadcasters, to decide whether we are robust. The Nelsons, this is Grant and Marilyn Nelson, they have a charitable trust that they have funded lots of things like this in the past, especially at universities, and we're on the same page in terms of feeling a need to scrutinise business and the establishment, if you like, much more. And so, yes, they've given the initial seed money for this and ongoing funding.
Do they tell you what to look at, what to investigate, or do they sign off on what you're proposing to do?
I work very closely with them. In the past, they have funded lots of things that have been entirely hands-off. They've just given the funding. I think I've tried to turn that around with this model. I've got Grant Nelson very involved in this. He has very strong views on and is very smart on these issues. So he's helping guide me in what I do. Our outputs will, sort of be evaluated on the strength of them, and if people feel we are just another interest group, that's fine, but we'll be an advocacy group fighting against business interests. So we're not actually advocating for particular, grants to be given from the taxpayer to anyone, which is quite different to other interest groups.
And as part of this quest for integrity, you're also quite hot on accountability. That's featured in lots of your columns. So on the Wellington Water case, for example, it's we've looked at this week. You called pretty strongly for the chair, Nick Leggett, to go. Is that always the best solution? Because we've seen this rash of almost the entire leadership of the health sector in the ministry has quit within a month. Pharmac as well. We've had Reserve Bank Governor. The circumstances of that are still a bit of a mystery as we're speaking, but does it really help to have pressure on public outfits saying if things go wrong, the top person has to carry the can and quit? Is it always the best thing to create that sort of pressure?
You're right in the sense that we might be getting resignation fatigue at the moment, but I think this is absolutely a good thing. It needs to be that the people that are paid the mega salaries in public entities are accountable and feel that there will be pressure on them if they stuff up. We have a real history in New Zealand of people stuffing up and having no consequences. They just move on.
But everyone wants people to be responsible, particularly if they're being paid pretty well at the top level of the public sector, and I get that. But if you mess up in a restaurant brands thing at Burger King or whatever, they can move someone across from KFC or whatever. Everyone can buy a burger or go to another chain or whatever. With public services, it's a bit different. If we've got difficult jobs like Pharmac, the health service, we appoint people that seem like they're the right people, and it's difficult. They carry the can, they go. This doesn't do us a service for our integrity if we're just revolving door that fit all the time.
Yeah, and maybe the system needs to change in that respect, and the politicians need to be designing a public service where there is proper accountability, enough people shouldering the burden rather than just one poor individual at the top, sure. But no, that's not going to mean that I or our institute is going to let up on pressuring those individuals. For too long, they've got off scot-free.
That was Dr. Bryce Edwards, director of the recently formed Integrity Institute, a philanthropically backed advocacy organisation to scrutinise and challenge vested interests in New Zealand, and also the outsized influence, he says, of wealthy people. And he's also the producer of the daily Integrity Institute news briefing, which summarises news coverage of current issues that's available to subscribers online and via Substack. That's it for this week. Thanks for listening. We'll be back again next week looking back at more of the week's news and media. And if you have any thoughts to share or ideas for us to follow up, or you spot anything you think we should know about, get in touch. Email us, mediawatch@rnz.co.nz, or you'll also find us at MediawatchNZ on X. And you can even write us a letter and send it to PO Box 123 Wellington. I'll be back next Wednesday with Midweek Media Watch. Catch you then. In the meantime, follow Media Watch and listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any podcast app to make sure you never miss an episode.